And the biggest takeaway people get when they listen to Riki Ellison and me is that we are talking about we're talking about defense. And the defensive part of our budget is so much smaller than the offensive. You got to fight for every little concession you get. And it looks like there's a little bit more space being made in L.A. for you. That's kind of a long introduction there, Ricky. But I don't mind doing it because it's not that late at night for you. You can stay out. You're still awake. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, and that surf report's about the same as it is here in L.A. So we've got good weather, and the surf's about 1 foot, so we're all good.
Okay, now tell me a little bit about this this Space System Command. What is that? What goes on there?
Well, that is the former Air Force Space Acquisition Group. So that is now transferred over to Space Force, and it operates and develops and acquires over $11-12 billion of all the space assets that go up.
Wow.
So they're in charge of that. They create the systems. They're in charge of both the launch points at Vandenberg Air Force Base and at Cape Canaveral of liftoff of satellites into space, both commercial and both military. It's a significant command that is operating capabilities in our space domain for the defense of the United States of America.
What I think is really, really cool about that, and I was trying to put two and two together to figure out, okay, what's this all about, is that means that they can tell, on the commercial level, who goes what and who does where. In other words, what they're doing is putting peaceful stuff out there for the greater part, but they could do anything they wanted, couldn't they?
They are doing both. So they're doing the big heavy lifts to geosync, 20,000 plus up, and they're doing low Earth orbit with the new SpaceX capabilities and sharing payloads with commercial aspects of it. So they are constantly putting stuff up.
Yeah, it must be really cool to be able to talk to them the way you do. Well, let's talk about the relationship. How did it get developed, and where's it going? What's the benefit of having these guys on your team?
Mike, let's get to the real point here.
Yeah.
Because what's astonishing to me is Russia just knocked out a satellite this week, announced it. And in debris that it created when it knocked out a satellite, that debris was in jeopardy of the space station.
Wow.
They did that.
I saw some of that.
There seems to be toleration from the world accepting that Russia is doing this. And there's no resistance to it. There's no stand-up to it. And China's done the same. So they've done the same anti-sat capability and really created warfare in space and demonstrated their ability to take down our satellites.
But Ricky, let me ask you this, because I think this is important. There's all kinds of satellites out there. Since, when I first started hearing about these launches decades ago, now there's a traffic jam out there. There's all kinds of stuff out there. But it's not all weaponry, is it? It's not all spy satellites.
No, it's not. And a lot of it's communication satellites, right? That's what the majority of it is at low Earth orbit. So but again, we make decisions. Our whole process in the world basically is dependent on those links up in space.
Yeah.
Right? So if you want to look at it that way, the whole economy is dependent on the defense of that domain. And when you blow up a satellite in space, you have thousands, maybe more than that, parts flying at speeds of 20,000 miles an hour. So a little bolt going that fast can run into another satellite and destroy it easily.
You pointed that out before too. Yeah, but one of the things you said, it's conceivable. And I saw the actual on television. I was watching Fox, and I saw part of that. It showed how little a piece of something can hit a space station, something, and knock it out.
Right. So that's Yikes. There. But let's get real a little bit, because we've invested in multi-billion-dollar defense satellites that sit way up at geosync orbit. Mm-hmm. There's only a couple of them. There's not many of them that we rely on for all our, for a majority of sensing and command and control and comms. Yep. Those big billion-dollar satellites, multi-billion-dollar satellites, are now being shown to be vulnerable to Chinese and Russian attack.
Well, see, that's my big question. Here's the thing. I'm getting it. It means that this thing that you're talking about is defenseless. And I'm wondering, we have the technology that you've explained to me for years, and that means clearly that so much the Chinese and the Russians have the same capacity to just go pick something as a target and knock it down.
What they're doing, what the Russian and Chinese are doing, are having little tiny satellites maneuver around our big satellites as they go and maneuver super close and just trail us.
Jeez.
And play with it. And that's, so we don't even have policy yet defined on what's aggression, what's conflict, what's not.
Mm-hmm.
So they're in these gray zones that are at our most vulnerable, critical assets that we don't know how, we can't defend them yet. We can't outmaneuver them. And they're taking advantage of it. Again, they're ahead of us.
Well, you did say one thing, and that is that so far these anti-satellite intercepts have no consequences from the international community. What's it going to take to light a fire under some of our friends?
Because you're going to have a complete chaos up there if you don't deter them or create a allied, consequences for these actions. I haven't seen it. Mm-hmm. There's no whirlwind. I mean, you saw the anti-sat thing in news; it was buried, and so it just incentivized these guys to do more of it. So
what's amazing to me. Let me take a fast break, Ricky. What's amazing to me is how these little tiny things they're putting out there can be so spot on. I mean, obviously they got the same technology, if not better than us. All that's coming up as we continue with Riki Ellison right after this short little break.
Phone lines are open at 1-833-296-TALK. That's 1-833-296-8255. Or email us at themikebuckshow@gmail.com. Now, back to Mike on AM 690 and FM 94.3. The Answer.
What's really interesting about this conversation we're having with Riki Ellison is a couple of weeks ago, last week, we talked about, we're all joyful because all of these community partners have come together and pitched their assets within each other to come in as a force to really take a good look around what's happening in the Pacific. Well, there's more than just the Pacific. Riki, is it the same players that you were successfully in that we talked about last time that are going to be important getting them to start reacting about China and Russia starting to fool around with these satellites?
So I think what's one of the great things that we're doing, each of those COCOMs, we have like 7 or 8 of them
mm-hmm.
that do the AOR. You have your Indo-PACOM is your headquarters there in Hawaii. Well, out of all of them, Indo-PACOM is going to pick a flag officer for their space component.
Mm-hmm.
So they're raising up a component command under Indo-PACOM, the first ever.
Wow.
At a flag officer position, at a general officer position. So they know how important it is.
Is it because of the increasing pressure that we now know they have the capability of doing to us if they want to? These are bad people.
But you have to have space because you live in such a vast area.
Mm-hmm.
The comms that you are dependent on are in space. So that defense of that is tremendous because that's what they're going to attack or that's what they're looking to attack when they start to move aggressively to Taiwan or elsewhere. That space is critical.
Hey, by the way, I got a great story. I got a great question from a guy named Harry. Harry says, please ask Riki, is it possible to have these space satellites defend themselves? Does he see that in the future? That's a good question. I don't know if there is any way you can say, okay, that satellite's out there and it can see a threat coming and shoot it down.
Well, absolutely. Those things can see things coming at them.
Yeah.
They can be defended by maneuvering. Little simple tasks like evasiveness, they can do that. Hardening will be difficult because it's a lot of weight.
Yeah.
When you start adding weight, the cost of putting these up are going to be extremely high. So that they have to weigh that
mm-hmm.
between offensive and defensive capabilities on satellites. But they need to also hide and seek it with vast capabilities of small satellites, and some of them being defensive capable and some of them not, to be able to make this much more massive. Mike, it's going to go back to where we were before.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Defense Initiative with Ronald Reagan. It's going back to directed energy, laser stuff, as well as electromagnetic jamming up there, because that's the most efficient way to do this.
There's
So
another angle. There's another one. This is from Carl, and this is a good point too. Can we just have vehicles up there that are patrolling the skies and looking to interact when one of these satellites is threatened? That's a pretty good thing, but I mean, I don't think people realize how big that sky is. I mean, the vast areas that get covered. Could you cover it with like patrol satellites or what?
I'm sure that is in the thinking. That is a possibility of being able to do it. But I think, using light, energy, laser can cover vast distances very quickly with no atmospheric effect on it. So you've got all that coming. So I think there are a lot of ways that you can start thinking through this, but we haven't thought through this. Just like hypersonic strike.
Yeah.
The Chinese and Russians got ahead of us. They're getting ahead of us on this as well. And, we're living in a place now where the jeopardy of our commercialism, of our industry, of our economy is at risk.
Okay, so earlier we were talking with Riki about, and like I said, he's in L.A. instead of Washington right now, so it's not too late for him, but it's getting there. Anyway, we're talking about defending and growing national security. That's what we were talking about, and what is the normal. And I don't think that people really understand how very tenuous the situation can be up there. They think, oh, well, that's hundreds of millions of miles away. Nothing can happen to them. That's not true.
Well, they know we're dependent on some major billion-dollar investments up there, and they know where they're at, and they can go to them, and they can demonstrate they can go to them. So that's vulnerable. Nobody's really crossed that line publicly until the Chinese hit an ASAT a couple of years ago, and then Russia hit it this past week. And again, the international community right now is tolerating that. There are no big-time consequences to deter them from continuing to do that. And I'm hopeful that President Biden can come up with something with the Chinese president let's get some sort of agreement somewhere where we can control or de-escalate the arms races that we're in.
It's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting, Riki, because earlier today I had the story that we're talking about Biden and Chinese president meeting, of all things, to discuss climate control and climate change and all of that stuff, all the green planet stuff. This seems to me to be, how can we say that without in the same breath saying, and by the way, would you stop fooling around with our communication satellites? You don't damage ours, we won't damage yours.
Well, I just think they can't afford, again, like Russia. Can they afford to go into an arms race on this stuff? Can we afford to do an arms race on this? Again, they're trying to break us. And again, you're seeing Russia and China work on a tandem front to put pressure on us to be able to manage and fight two wars against two different places in the world. That's, we're the ones stretching right now.
Mm-hmm.
So they're putting maximum pressure on us. You've seen the mass up on the Ukraine border. You see Taiwan. So it's a very challenging thing for one country like us to handle both sides. And we've got to get allies in here to support us and to pay their dues on defense of their own country.
Yeah, and that's, by the way, that's the other thing. Somebody else chimed in and says, but this sounds like stuff that's going to cost a lot of money. Do we have, other than from our allies, do we have agreement? But also, are they willing to help us fund what needs to be done to protect ourselves?
But I would say to you, stuff up in space is far more efficient than stuff down on the Earth, because on the Earth, you're in a curvature of the Earth. You can only see 20 miles or so beyond the horizon. So it's a lot of money that we need to go up. And it is more efficient. It may be more expensive right now until that breaks with the cost of reduction of launch, which we are getting there with SpaceX and so forth and Blue Origin. That's going to happen. But that's where we have to go for more efficiency for our ability to defend ourselves.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting because of all the things that we've talked about, I think people need to be a little more aware of this because they're not looking at weapons beating each other up. They're looking at somebody going after. And by the way, aren't some of these satellites that you're talking about private investments that then they rent back the services to different countries and our country?
But Mike, it goes back to decision making. Who makes the decision the quickest and the fastest? So being able to see and understand what's going on is number one. So the only way you can see and understand what's going on above you and below you is satellite constellations that are hooked into command and control, most likely artificial intelligence and machine-to-machine learning, because the human mind can't process that.
Wow.
We've got to go there to be able to make the decisions faster than our opponent to dominate that game. We're not there yet. We're stovepiped in different
I was going to say, it sounds like this huge chess match, and people are just looking at each move and turning that hourglass over when it's time to make your move. It's too bad that it's got to be like that, but that seems to be the major blocks between us and Russia and China in being able to be a little.
What's the alternative, Mike? The alternative is going to World War.
Oh.
No, we're not going to go back like we did 50 years ago. We don't need to do that. We got to play this, and it's going to cost some money. But it's a lot more worth costing money to deter this without going to conflict. So you got to do these measures. And this stuff is costing money. And the Space Force is putting forward like a $7 billion bill to get funding to do what it needs to do to get up there.
It's all about the
We
money.
got to start moving away. Yeah, but we got to start moving away of, the last war. It doesn't work anymore. The last war tactics and capabilities don't work for the future war and deterrent.
Okay, now that being said, because we're out of time, are you most likely to be where is the family gathering happening for Thanksgiving for the Ellison family?
I think I'm going home to San Francisco.
Yes.
That's where I'm going.
Wouldn't surprise me one little bit, my friend. Thanks very much for hooking up. And if I don't be able to chat with you before the Thanksgiving, Ricky, from my family, from me and Jackie to you guys, happy Thanksgiving, my friend. Nice talking to you, as always.
Mahalo. Thank you,
brother.
Mike.
There you go. Our buddy Riki Ellison.